Thank you all for joining us on this Making Changes on Your Site webinar with the National Education Nature Park. A bit of housekeeping. This webinar is going to run for the next 45 minutes and it will be recorded and added onto the YouTube channel, as with all other previous webinars, to be watched and rewatched as you please. We have the Q&A set up, so please do ask questions as we go through each of these slides. Please do pop them in as we go through, just pepper them through and we'll answer them as we go. If we have time, we'll also do them at the end, but we'll also be answering them as we go. Speakers for today are Fiona Greenwald, Senior Programme Officer for the North East, working with the Royal Horticultural Society, and myself, Juliana, and Tom Lawrence, both community science officers with the Natural History Museum. Over to Fiona.
Thanks, Juliana. Hello, everyone. Now, we've got lots to talk about, but before we get sort of dive into the nitty-gritty about making changes on your site, I just thought it was worthwhile zooming out a little bit and just thinking about climate action plans. Many of you will know about the expectation for your setting to have a climate action plan and a sustainability lead in place. And we just want to think about that bigger picture and how by making biodiversity changes, you're actually supporting your climate action plan, or it might give you some ideas. In a climate action plan, if we can just pop onto the next slide, a climate action plan's got four sort of pillars. So you're looking at the adaptation and resilience for climate change, biodiversity, climate education and green careers, as well as decarbonisation. And we like to think of our biodiversity improvements as being sort of nature-based solutions to all of these pillars, really. There's often ways by making a biodiversity improvement, you are supporting the different targets in your climate action plan. And an easy, I'll just do a wee example of that. If you've got a meadow, you are adding a sort of sponge, so when it rains that soaks up the water. You're obviously improving habitats and giving your learners another habitat to explore and learn about, and you're also hitting decarbonisation targets because a meadow captures more carbon. So it's something to think about as you make your changes. There's lots of support to help you with your climate action plan. Our regional nature park officers are around the country. Hopefully you know some of us already, but use us, get in touch with us. And I just want to flash up a couple of logos of other organisations and point them out, which can also help you with a climate action plan. The Climate Ambassadors Programme is a place where you can put in your school needs. So, for example, in this case, you might want an ecologist to help you, and there are volunteer ecologists working as climate ambassadors who perhaps can come out and support your school. So explore the Climate Ambassadors Programme. And also Let's Go Zero is another organisation who can help you, like us with the Nature Park. There are regional officers and they can help you write your climate action plan and make these changes in your school sites. And last but not least, there is an online website called Sustainability Support for Education, where you can get things like climate action plan templates and all these connections to these other organisations and us. So explore that too. So just a little bit of a bigger picture to what you're doing in on your school settings. And back to Juliana now, I think.
A quick quiz. If you were to add wildflowers on your site, how much do you think that pollinator biodiversity would increase by? So this is from one of our strands of research work on the meta-analysis that's collating results from many, many different scientific papers to reach a consensus. And they found out that 109% is the increase in total number of pollinators and 46% increase in different pollinator species, which is absolutely massive. And in terms of overall biodiversity, not just pollinators, that can be up to 229%. And what they also looked at in more detail was in terms of bees and whether the size of the wildflower patch impacted this massive increase. And it didn't. The size didn't matter, and the context of whether it was in an urban or rural area. And in that same vein, the size of any intervention that you're making on your site, no matter how big or small or how many of them you're able to do, it will make a massive difference, because altogether, it's every school, college, and nursery across the country that is has a potential to take part and collectively look at the difference that we're making right across the country. So feel really part of something huge and feel like no matter how small it is, it will make a massive difference.
So yeah, thank you very much, Juliana. So for the rest of this webinar, you're going to be hearing about a range of different things you can do to make changes on your site. You're going to be hearing about greater green, about grasslands, and about ponds. But how do you know which of those changes is best for your site? Well, if you've been on the Nature Park website before, especially on the How It Works page or through any of the resources, you'll be quite familiar with this logo in the middle. This is the 5-step cycle, and this is sort of the 5-step cycle of Nature Park and what we encourage you to do on your site. So the getting to know your space, establishing your baseline, to then identifying opportunities, making decisions, making that change happen, and very, very importantly, and we'll touch on this later, recording that change to see the changes that you've made compared to the baseline. So there's a lot of resources on the website, and the important thing for all these resources that's really involving your learners in this process. So it's by doing those resources, by following this cycle, that's how you can, work out what change is best for your site, because every school site is slightly different in terms of geography, in terms of size, in terms of habitats, loads of different things. So there's not really, this is the best change for every single site, because that's not just, that's not realistic. We're giving advice on, some of the more typical things you might be looking to do, but there could be a whole range of things you might do. So for the change that's best for your site, it's really best to sort of follow the 5-step cycle, use those resources, because then, the answer should come to you through that. So what are some things to think about when you're making a change on your site? Well, a critical part of Nature Park is that it is for both nature and for people. It's obviously, within school grounds, it's got to work for people as well. It's not purely nature. The two things are very important. Both rely, on the other and need the other. And there's obviously clear signs between nature and then people's well-being. So you've got to make sure that your changes that you're making work for both people and nature. So when you're thinking about people, well, obviously a hugely important thing, not only in a school, but everywhere, is health and safety. How is the change that you're making, how's that going to impact any health and safety or any health and safety around the change that you're making? A very important thing, how could you use that change that you're making in your teaching? So, for example, if you're putting a pond on your site, well, when you're designing that pond or creating the pond, think about how you can make it accessible, so then you could use the pond in pond dipping instead of having to go off site to go do pond dipping somewhere else. Maybe there's a possibility that you could do it on your site and do it, with your learners, incorporate into your teaching. And then, of course, ongoing management might be needed. It's very easy to, initially make a change, but then you might make a change that actually needs some ongoing management. So, for example, with trees, it's very easy to plant a tree, but for young trees especially, especially over the summer where there can be periods of drought, watering them is very, very important. So there's ongoing management that's needed with them. So it's just things to think about. Who's going to be doing that ongoing management? So yeah, very, very important. And then thinking about nature, having a diverse range of habitats, so you're supporting as much biodiversity as possible. Thinking about life cycles, there's so much in the news about pollinators, and the instinct might be, well, let's have tons and tons of flowers for all the pollinators. Well, pollinators have different life cycles. So if we're looking at the images right there, you've got a red admiral feeding on lavender. Well, Does lavender really help, the early stage of the red admiral, the caterpillar? Well, no, it doesn't, because one of the main larval food plants for the red admiral caterpillar and for several other butterflies that you typically see, so comma, peacock, they all like feeding on stinging nettles. So, you got to think about all different aspects of life cycles. So yeah, thinking of those larval food plants. Natural food supplies. So it's easy to think of, well, you want to feed animals, well, let's put up a bird feeder. But as I'm sure many of you have seen in the news, there's a lot of things coming out about not feeding birds, especially over the summer, due to transmission of diseases and things like that. So if you think, well, we want to see more birds on our site, well, think about maybe the birds that you're trying to attract. Well, what do they eat? What are their natural food supplies, and how can you provide those food supplies for them without putting up a bird feeder? And then ecosystems as a whole. So we're trying to get you into thinking about not just one sort of individual species, but thinking about many, many different species. So whole ecosystems and how everything can work together. So if we're looking at this thing right here, so this is from a resource that's going to be coming out soon, about looking about, is this a good habitat for honeybees? Well, you might say, we want honeybees on our site. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out and get some beehives. Well, actually, really, the beehives, they're providing, they've got oxygen, they've got shelter, but they don't have two critical things, and that's food and that's water. But if we look at this image right now, so we've got an area that is perfect for honeybees, that provides them with everything they need. So we've got a tree in the middle. Well, that might be an older tree, a veteran tree that's got holes in that honeybees might nest in. It's got a lake, so it's got water, the water that they need. But then also you can see there's tons of gardens around there that would be providing them with the food that they need. So thinking about all the different things that, if you're looking at a certain group of animals, all the things that they might need to survive. Then really, really important, Nature Park is all about, we really, really want to encourage the whole school process, getting everyone involved. And, it's something that obviously can take time, but it's really, really worthwhile. We've got a success story on our success stories page that discusses the whole school approach, particularly at Colney's Junior School. So the ways that they've done it. So feel free to, go on there, and if I can give you any sort of help, inspiration, that would be fantastic. So just some things you can do to involve the whole school. So if you're thinking about, you've done the 5-step cycle, you've got an idea about the change you want to do. Well, if your school grounds have, if you have grounds teams or estate managers, involve them early on in, things you're thinking about doing. We've certainly heard stories of schools where they planted wildflowers. They've had a wildflower meadow growing, and then a grounds team has come through and mown it down because there's not been any communication between the people that have been creating the wildflower meadow and the grounds team, and so they've not known that they shouldn't be mowing that down. So it's really important to get them involved, get them, with a sense of, sort of responsibility that everyone's looking after this, everyone's making the school ground better for the whole school community. If you think about growing things, fruit and vegetables, well, involve catering staff. There's been a lot of discussion in the news recently about changes to school food. Well, maybe talk to the catering staff and say, we're thinking about growing things. What would be something that you could potentially use, in the cooking for school lunches? So just thinking about getting everyone involved, and then also dividing tasks amongst year groups as well. That can be a great way. Maybe one year group can look at habitat mapping an area. Maybe another year group can be involved in doing some digging or something like that. There's a whole range of different things that you can do. And one thing, so mentioning about not getting areas mown down where you've been making a change. We do have some plaques on the website. You can see an example of one here that you could put in an area, something just to let people know, that a space is being, looked after, and a change is being made in that space. So then maybe potential people might treat it, with a bit more respect, maybe not littering it. If somebody from outside of school will see it, increasing their interest in the school. So yeah, those are available on the website. So please feel free to download them and put them up. Just want to a quick touch on risk benefit. That's obviously a huge thing. Schools mentioned the health and safety. I'm not going to talk too long on this because we've got quite a few guides on the website. We've got health and safety guides. We've got a risk benefit assessment guide for EYFS. And then we've also got guides on nature-based discovery and inquiry-based learning. But just wanted to highlight that make sure when you're thinking about these things, not just focusing on the risk, but also the benefits as well, and look at the balance. What can you get out of the changes that you're making? So yeah, we have those guides, so the guides can say a lot better than I can. So I'd highly encourage you to go and look at those, and you can see an example of one there on the right. Just quickly before I pass it on to Juliana, we have a whole page on grey to green. That was sort of the first thing that we started off with, Nature Park. And the reason for that is that every nursery school and college has some grey space. Not everyone has green space. You can see an example of a school that changed a grey space to some green. So an area where you could also get some potentially very easy wins. So, you know, on an area that's grey space, you can assume little to no biodiversity. So it's an easy way to improve nature and really work out your nature gains, and then that can also leave you with more time to study your green spaces. And as it says right there, as Juliana mentioned earlier, any change that you've made, however small, you're creating homes, resources for wildlife to move into areas and thrive. But then also think of those as nature-based solutions, as Fiona mentioned. So things like overheating and flooding are huge issues everywhere, particularly in schools. Well, how can you use some of those grey to green methods to answer potentially some of those questions? We've got guidance on terms of our grey to green page. So everything from flowers, grasses, fresh water, trees, green walls, and then also saving rainwater as well. So we've got a whole guidance page on all of these. And then one success story right here, like to mention, so thinking about a nature-based solution. So Carlton Academy Manchester, this is on the website as well. This school had a classroom that was getting particularly warm in the summer and quite unpleasant for some of the students. So what they ended up doing is a number of the different year groups came together, and they ended up creating this green wall right here. And you can see from the temperature data on the right, if you look at this bottom image right here, where they've got the green wall, the temperature is significantly lower than outside of the green wall, and they were able to reduce the temperature in the classroom simply putting up a green wall. So again, thinking about how the changes that you're making can work for both nature and for people as well. I'm now going to pass on to Juliana, who's going to dive more into grasslands.
Thanks, Tom. Let's dive into the practicalities of grassland. Are you getting echoes at all? Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So from the 22 million square meters of habitats that schools on Nature Park have already mapped, we know that playing fields and lawns are the biggest area on school grounds. So there's the biggest potential for increasing biodiversity. And happily, it's also the easiest habitat to improve, because simply by cutting the grass differently, it makes a huge biodiversity change. And what we're doing by cutting the grass differently and at spaced out intervals, we're simply mimicking what the natural processes would have been of like grazing animals moving through a pasture, for example. Lots of resources on the website, which are collating all the latest academic research, best practice guidance, and written in a really nice, friendly, accessible way. So I've just picked out a couple of different points to go through here in this webinar, but to read it all in more detail, I refer you to go and check out the website. Before you start enhancing your grassy areas, we've just launched a couple of weeks ago the Grassland Plant Survey. And this is the perfect survey to use to track and measure the impact, the positive impact that you're making. So simply by doing the survey before you're making a change and then again after, is just the perfect way to measure your impact. It involves searching for certain indicator plants and then estimating their percentage cover either directly or indirectly by ticking boxes in a grid. So look at the webinar from last Wednesday to see in more detail the detailed how-to run the grassland plant survey. And the indicator species that we've picked out are about showing you where on the continuum of lawn to meadow is your particular grassy area that you're surveying. The ones on the left give you an indication that it's sort of disturbed, compacted soil. The ones in the middle are sort of in between the playing field to meadow spectrum, and then all the way on the right we've got common mouse ear and yellow rattle, which are usually more likely to be found in meadows. So you can really see by doing the grassland plant survey a few times, you can really track how you're slowly moving your lawn towards that meadow. And lots of resources coming soon about how to use these surveys, these results to interpret and make decisions. So ideas on where you could make the changes. You could depave or take away some rubble or use some bare soil on your site. But by far the easiest is just looking at the edges of your playing fields, any grassy verges, or even better, bonus points, if you can think about linking up existing natural areas. You might have a playing field in a corner and some hedges in another. Are there any grassy strips, even by reception, they don't need to be huge areas, that you could let the grass grow long and connect up those different areas like a wildlife corridor across your site? Important is that for grasslands to thrive, they'll need a bit of sun. So plan to have them in an area where there's at least some sun for at least part of the day. If you do have high quality habitats like a woodland or tall wild patches, I'd encourage you to keep those. Those are really valuable for lots of different wildlife, especially the weedy patches for insects. They're such high value habitats. If you did want to diversify the tall weedy patches, you can sow some grassland seeds in certain patches within the bigger area. But overall, I would aim to keep the high quality habitat that you have and look at your site as a whole and see what kind of lawns perhaps you could tackle. You really want to be aiming for a diversity of habitats across your whole site. The easiest thing you can do is just not mow between April and August and let the grass grow long and see it thrive. See all the fantastic wildlife species that will appear. All you need to do is just mow it at the end of summer. So let it grow between April and August, and then sort of September, October, mow it once and then remove the cuttings off site. Perhaps a few days later they've been cut so any wildlife can scuttle off. And the idea of removing the cuttings is to reduce the fertility of the soil, which is counterintuitive, but reducing the fertility of the soil is actually essential for a wildflower meadow, for a biodiversity. Poor soil means high biodiversity. And you could aim to manage your grasslands a bit differently across your site. So you might have some areas that you need to have mown all the time, and that's fine. You might have some that you mow just the once, and then you might have some that you leave as uncut refuges for a few years. To still keep your meadows and your grassy areas enjoyable and to also make them intentional, you could cut and mow some paths through the grasslands so that young people can still go out, explore, look at all the flowers and the insects and the wildlife in those spaces, and that you're making it quite clear that it was a decision to let the grass grow long and let it thrive. So if you let the grass grow long, naturally it will be colonized by lots of grasses and wildflower species. But if you can't wait, and to speed the process up, we'll go through a few steps to boost your existing grasslands. Just a note that you can also plant up a meadow where there's previously been concrete. It will require depaving, and you'll probably need a contractor for that. It'll probably be a bit more expensive. And I'll refer you to the website as there's more detailed guidance there to dive in. For an existing grassland, this can be a whole field, a whole large area, or you could pick out of that big field small patches that you'd like to enhance. What you do is you take some spades and you scrape off the first layer of topsoil. That's the very fertile, dark topsoil, which is about 10 centimeters deep. You're only skimming off the first 10 centimeters, so the grass and the first 10 centimeters of soil. And then you're exposing the light brown subsoil underneath. That subsoil, just make sure that that's kind of nice, fine and crumbly, watered and sort of ready for planting. I should say about that, the reason we're doing this is if you were to just scatter the seeds on top of grassland, they wouldn't be able to survive due to the competition of all the different plants. So scraping off that soil, making it nice and bare and level and crumbly will allow the best chance for your seedlings to then push up and thrive. In terms of choosing plants, so there's a wonderful, if you want to do a soil texture test, there's a really simple one from the RHS website. And then in terms of planting plants and choosing the plants, you can choose between seeds, plug plants, which are just really tiny plants, plants in bigger containers, or even wildflower turfs if you really can't wait and you're happy to splurge. The Plant Life's Managing Meadows website has got like just a treasure trove of really great advice on creating wonderful meadows. So I suggest you take a look there. They also list great seed suppliers. I'm going to just focus of all those different options. I'm just going to focus on the seeds because they are cheapest, easiest, and also most time effective as well. So to choose your seeds, search online for perennial native grassland mixes. Perennial native grassland mixes. And we're looking for wild species, not the garden varieties. The best time of year to sow these seeds is in autumn time. And you can just grab a couple of grams of seed per square meter. You can also add a bit of sand because it makes them kind of easier to pick up. And then as you're scattering them across, you don't need to then cover them with tons of soil as if you were planting potatoes or anything. You can just tread over the seeds on top of the soil and push, and that will sort of press the seeds in. And it's a fantastic activity to do with an enthusiastic class. And then once you've got that established grassland, you can consider sowing yellow rattle seeds. Yellow rattle is a plant that's got those yellow flowers in the picture there. And it's called the meadow maker because it feeds on grasses. So it will suppress the grass and allow the wildflowers to grow. And just a quick note there to say that although brightly colored annual flowers are really appealing and really beautiful, perennial plants, perennial meaning that they come back year after year, are just so much easier to maintain long term. So really suggest you go for perennial plants. In terms of costs, if you're doing any depaving or removing of large amounts of topsoil, that will be the most expensive cost. As for the plants themselves, they're super cheap. £10 for a 20 meter squared bag of seeds, and the plug plants are about £1 each. So really cheap, really easy to do. So either letting your grass grow long or creating a bit of bare soil and then planting these seeds is just really cost effective. A story for you. There was a school that decided to count the number of species when they had just a lawn, and then they took part in the No Mow May campaign, letting their grass grow long. They counted the number of species before, and then they counted the number of species after, and they had 3 times the amount of species. So the potential biodiversity gains are absolutely massive, and all you need to do is just letting the grass grow long. A couple of resource spotlights coming very soon. This is a student-facing, both are student-facing, and this is about understanding what is the grassland best for whom? Is it for walking dogs? Is it for playing sports? Is it for wildlife? And kind of reflecting on all the different priorities that your class might have and how you make a decision about what kind of grassland to enhance and how. And next is about the sort of processes that it takes to create a grassland ecosystem. And I believe I'm now passing on to Pons to Fiona for all things ponds.
Thanks, Juliana. Yep, so from grasslands to ponds and wet areas. It might seem like a sort of, you know the answer already, but why would you want to add a pond into your school grounds? Well, you probably know adding ponds on wet areas are one of the best ways of improving biodiversity in a garden or in some grounds. You're adding an aquatic habitat in a terrestrial environment, so you get a whole different suite of plants and animals living there and a massive boost to biodiversity. So it's the biodiversity is a great reason. I can stay on that slide for a wee minute, Tom. The other couple of great reasons are we've lost absolutely huge numbers of ponds in the last century, down by 50% across the UK. So just a huge loss of that habitat. And if you're working with learners, it's one of the most fun ways of learning about biology and engaging with science. You can learn about, use ponds to learn about life cycles, get some really clear examples with aquatic animals, and also links in being near water helps reduce cortisol, and it's great for sort of well-being and just has providing a sort of calm and relaxing atmosphere in your school grounds. So some great reasons to add a pond or a wetland area into your school grounds. And we can pop on to the next slide. We've got lots of resources on the website again. We point you towards the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, Making a Big Splash for Nature. They've got some great guidance there for creating how to create a pond from scratch. And we have got lots of teaching resources, things like ID sheets, so support for you to integrate using your pond or outdoor environment to teach some science and look at different aspects of the curriculum, meet those curriculum targets. And we've hot off the press, really, we've got a link through now to a great new resource from Natural England. It's a little training course, it's free, and it takes about an hour and a half to do. And it's basically a really solid introduction to sort of conservation management techniques. So looking at not just ponds, but managing grassland, trees, hedges. It's a really super little solid introduction. Would be a great thing to point your estate management team towards having a look at, and you could add it into your climate action plan as well as an action for those involved in managing the school grounds. And so if you want, so you've decided to create a pond, have a think about, could it be a community effort? Could you involve the wider school community to help you? It's a really nice thing to do, and just spread that sort of sense of ownership within your school community. It's worth probably checking in with the Climate Ambassadors programme. There could well be a local ecologist who would be able to support you with some of your decisions there. So have a look at that website. And above all, consult with your learners, see what they're thinking and where would they like to have their pond, what would they like their pond to look like. But there are a few practicalities to think about. Ideally, you want a pond in quite a sunny spot, maybe a little bit of semi-shade, and avoid overhanging trees. When it's really shaded out, you don't get quite as much biodiversity in your pond, and all the leaves falling in the pond will kind of silt it up and deoxygenate it. So in a nice sort of open setting is a really good idea. Think about the surrounding area. Now, although this pond in the picture here has got hard edges all round, I know that this pond is in a nursery in County Durham, so they've chosen to design that pond because they're working with very young learners. Sort of the safety features are kind of highlighted there. Ideally, in a pond, you would like some long grassy areas, at least along one edge. We think of things like frogs and toads and newts living in the pond, but actually they only spend part of their life cycle, their early part of their life cycle in the water. And for most of their life, they live in long grass, under logs and under stones. So having some wild, sort of longer grass areas round about is a good idea next to your pond. And think about, can you site your pond near some already existing rainwater barrels, or could you get some sort of put in close by? It's better to top up your pond with rainwater. It's more sustainable and it's better for the plants and animals because it doesn't have the chlorine in it of tap water. There are different ways to build your pond. So you could go for a flexible pond liner with underlay or a preformed hard mold shape. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but going for a good quality butyl rubber flexible pond liner is probably the best long-term sustainable solution, looking at maybe 20, 25 years before you'd have to do anything to the pond. You just need to make sure you've got a really good thick area, thick layer of underlay, and you can add in old carpets and things like that to protect the liner from any sharp edges. You would sculpt out your pond with different sort of depths around the pond, so you've got deep water and shallow water, and you'd still need to sculpt out the ground for a preformed mold as well, and you get different shapes and sizes of them. In all of the ponds, it's a good idea, and this one's got a lovely example of a sort of sloping beach area where if, for example, a hedgehog fell into the pond, it can swim around, find a shallow area and climb out. In a preformed mold type of pond, that's harder to do, but you can still build up a shallow end with bricks and stones so that any animals can get their own way out of a pond. And on the next slide, we've just got another example of a pond. So this one's a little bit more sort of raised, which is an idea to think about. But again, you don't need a hugely deep pond to make a difference. Most pond life can happen in sort of 10, 20 centimetres. So having a bit more depth just makes the pond a little bit more interesting and gives another sort of mini micro habitat to the pond, but you can go for something quite shallow. When you're choosing plants for your pond, do be quite careful. There are a few very invasive aquatic plants. So initially, perhaps you might want to focus on using native species to just be secure that you're not going to introduce something invasive into the environment. You want to have some oxygenating plants, so they're ones that sort of live under the water, and all plants produce oxygen, but they sort of are extra good at it in the actual water body. So things like hornwort are great for that. Adding in some floating plants. Now, water lilies are good for this, and this is one area where you could perhaps think about choosing a species rather than the native water lily needs a few feet of water to survive, but you can get some dwarf water lilies that will grow in 30 centimetres in a small pot. So they have the leaves floating on the water, which shades out the pond a little bit to stop algal blooms happen if it's very, very bright. It's a good idea to have about a third of your pond surface sort of shaded by plants. And they also help keep the temperature down and provide another sort of microhabitat using the surface of the pond. So having some sort of floating plants on the pond surface is a good idea. And of course, marginals, they're the ones that grow round the edge and are kind of the transition zone from water through to a terrestrial habitat. It's a really rich sort of area for biodiversity in a pond. And we mentioned the sloping beach area earlier. So now, why have I got a picture of a woodland here? Well, if we actually left our ponds alone, they would actually fill up, and we talk about the climax vegetation, which is what the over the UK, the whole vegetation would naturally turn into a woodland over most of the area. So the ponds fill up, they silt up, and trees would start growing in them. So you do need to think about maintenance of your pond. And depending on the size of your pond, that could be every 3 to 10 years and just what species you've got in it. So you need to do a bit of a clear out every so often. If you're lucky enough to have more than one pond, don't do that clear out and all of them at once. So get a bit of a rotation going on there. And the best time to do that is in the autumn and winter, because many of the animals will either be overwintering in the long grass, or they might be overwintering as eggs in the bottom of the pond or at the edge. So you do the least sort of damage over the autumn and winter, and aim to keep about 20% of the vegetation that you're clearing out there. So you've got a good kind of inoculum to get going again in the springtime. And try to involve the learners in the whole sort of reasons about why you're clearing out the pond, and they can get stuck in and help maybe spread the stuff you've scooped out, the material you've scooped out of the pond along the edge, so that any animals can sort of scuttle back into the pond. And you don't need a huge pond to make an effect. Container ponds are great. And actually the one on the right hand picture is something I've got in the back garden here. It's just a shallow tray, only about 6 centimeters deep. I keep it topped up with rainwater. I get dronefly larvae, that's the rat-tailed maggots, live in there. So I've got a part of a pollinator's life cycle going on in that little pond area. The birds come down and drink from it. They have a little bath in it, and the blackbirds scoop out the gunge from the bottom and use it to line their nest. So I've even seen a school with just a washing up basin sunk into the ground, and that makes a little pond. So you could start small and get more ambitious as you go on. If in the next slide, you could even think about a rain garden. They're like a sort of lined container where the water's diverted off the school building into this container and then ultimately flows out of a sort of other drain pipe at the end, and it acts like a sponge where it can soak up an excess rainfall and again meet some of your climate action plan resilience targets. Situated around a school building because it's next to a drain pipe gives your learners a great chance of experiencing that on a daily basis out in the playground as a possibility. And if you've not got a lot of space, it's a way of adding an aquatic water environment to your school. And on the next slide, yeah, just a couple of little success stories. This school, Kinder Primary in London, totally got the vision of sort of extending a habitat. So on the picture in the top left, on the other side of the wall is a community pond, and they've made a little sort of mini wildlife corridor through the wall so that animals can pass between the two ponds, and they've extended that habitat into their school grounds. And on the next slide, there's a lovely story where the school took a sort of hands-off approach and allowed those ponds to sort of naturally fill up themselves. And I love Richard's sort of point at the bottom that it's really true. If you just give nature the space and the opportunity, it will get in there and it will bounce back and make a huge difference. That's all from me on ponds.
Thank you, Fiona. We will be wrapping up very quickly now, as I'm aware we're on time. But just to say, anytime you do make a change, either for biodiversity or whether you're adding a car park or changing a path, anytime there's the word change, the tracking changes tool is where we really encourage you to draw those changes on. And the reason we've got a tracking changes tool different to the baseline habitat mapper tool is that we're comparing the two different habitats on there to be able to say this many square meters of such and such lawn turned into meadow, and therefore we can estimate the sort of biodiversity change made. Great way to evidence your changes to SLT and to show the amazing positive impact that you're all making.
And just to finish up, over to me, I think do check out the frequently asked questions and the troubleshooting page. There's a form there. If you've got any questions, you can pop them in the sort of contact form. Get in touch with your regional team. We absolutely love connecting up with schools in our region. So just get in touch and say hello even, and explore the nature park map. Look at schools that are joined the nature park near you or that haven't, and you might know some staff there. Encourage them to join. We'd love to hear about that. And do explore the success stories on the website. And over to, I think, thank you for joining us today. And I think that's us, Juliana, is that right?
That's absolutely right, Fiona. Thank you everyone for joining us. Like we said, this webinar will be on the YouTube channel, so you can watch and rewatch, and do pop any last minute questions or feedback or how you found this, or if you have any desires for particular habitats that you want to have a focused webinar on in the future, just pop it in the Q&A and we'll take note. Thank you all for joining us. See you at the next one.